So, hello, welcome everybody to FSHD University. This is our monthly webinar presenting experts in the field of FSHD, including researchers, clinicians, and oftentimes many of you, people who live with FSHD every day because you are truly experts in the experience of having this condition. So today for FSH University, we're thrilled to have Michaela Walker from the University of Kansas. She is going to present on MOVE and MOVE Plus, which are two of the largest ever natural history studies of FSHD. And she will explain to us why they matter, especially now as we are in this very exciting time with drugs in clinical trials in various stages and new ones on the way. These are the first treatments ever that are designed to try to stop the progression of the disease by attacking the genetic cause. So it's very exciting, but there's a lot that goes into designing clinical trials and developing the evidence base to show that they're actually having an impact. And that is part of what is going to be happening with MOVE and MOVE Plus. So Michaela Walker is, she'll tell you more about her formal title. We just think of her as the epicenter of, at the epicenter of the Clinical Trial Research Network. And she is a coordinator of the MOVE and MOVE Plus, but so many other aspects of the work going on at the University of Kansas. So with that, I will stop sharing and I'll turn over to Michaela so she can share her slides.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I just want to start by saying thank you so much to the FSHD Society for having me give this webinar today. This is truly a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited to be here talking to you about it today. My name is Michaela Walker. I am a research project manager at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City, Kansas. And I serve as one of our leads here at KU, but also really my role is being a lead project manager for the FSHD Clinical Trial Research Network. Really, the research network is a group of academic centers and collaborators working together to better understand FSHD, improve care delivery, and make sure we're prepared for clinical trials and these amazing therapies that are coming down the pipeline, and that we're prepared for them and get them into the clinic as fast as possible. But what I'm here to talk to you about today is the MOVE FSHD study and the MOVE Plus study. So I will go ahead and get started. So our study's name is Motor Outcomes to Validate Evaluations in Fascioscapulohumeral Muscular Dystrophy, but we just like to call it MOVE FSHD. And I'm going to kind of talk to you about the study and then show you some of like our preliminary baseline data and our characteristics of the study so far. So a little bit of background, I'm not going to go into great detail of it because you guys are already experts in FSHD, but just as a basic understanding, FSHD is caused by the expression of a normally silenced gene called DUX4. So DUX4 is not normally turned on, but with FSHD it is, which is what is causing your disease. And this is what we call a toxic gain of function, a gene that's turned on that's not supposed to be. This is a dominantly inherited disorder, which means there's typically a 50-50% chance that you can pass it on to others within your family. It's slowly progressive or considered slowly progressive, and it's quite variable between individuals within the same family who have the same kinds of mutation, and even just within one individual from one side of the body to the other. You can see a great difference. So I wanted to start with this on why, and I'm going to play my video here. Why are we doing this study, and why are natural history studies still needed for FSHD when we have these therapeutic studies already at the forefront and already enrolling? I like to tell patients that I feel like I'm laying the train tracks as the train is coming. So these clinical trials are already here, and we are still developing the tools to better understand the disease, how to measure the disease, and trying to find what is going to be a clinically meaningful change. So really, we're doing this because we need additional data on people with FSHD. We also wanted to have a study that would allow us to continue seeing patients from our previous studies and just following them over a longer period of time. Many of our patients participated in the Resolve FSHD study or a Wellstone FSHD study, so this just allowed them to keep coming to see us and collecting data on them over time. It will help us better understand the disease. The longer we can follow people over 4 or 5 years, the more we understand what the changes over time might look like. Also, MOVE was meant to help improve care delivery for FSHD. Really, the MOVE study was based off of what we considered to be what should be happening standard in a clinic visit. Things like seeing your doctor for a physical exam, getting blood samples taken, doing questionnaires, as well as looking at your strength, function, and your breathing and how that might have changed since your last visit. Also, really, the study was meant to include all individuals who have FSHD, including FSHD type 1, FSHD type 2, children, those who might be in a wheelchair, and it was meant to be a more representative group of everyone who has FSHD compared to the people who are typically allowed to participate in the drug studies. Overall, the other big why is that this data can help academic researchers, industry, those pharmaceutical companies, and the community prepare for clinical trials, hasten therapeutic development for FSHD, hopefully help speed up the approval process with the FDA, and overall improve care delivery of FSHD for the community. There we go. So just kind of reiterating, the primary goal of the MOVE FSHD study is to hasten therapeutic development and improve care delivery for FSHD. And we are going to do this by determining predictive value of motor assessments, so your strength, your function, your breathing, when you first come to see us, and biomarkers, so things that we might be looking at in the blood, MRI, reachable workspace. So we're looking at those and how they change over time and how they affect milestones of disease progression. So really, we're trying to correlate what we call hard health outcomes. So what is some predictive of someone maybe needing a breathing machine or an orthotic or a wheelchair? Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, and we're trying to see what's going to be predictive for someone needing that kind of equipment. So our overall study aims, so we have 4 aims for the MOVE study. The first one is to determine the rate of progression of FSHD. So how does FSHD change in people over time? The second aim is to determine predictors of motor milestones. So again, we're trying to look at the predictive nature of certain characteristics, like your genetic mutation, your gender, your age, but also, is there something predictive about how someone gets up out of a chair, or how someone does stairs, or how fast someone does something? Is that predictive for if someone's going to need a cane or a breathing machine or a wheelchair? The third aim is patient-reported disease impact over time. So really, that's just, how do you guys perceive that you're changing over time? And is that correlating with what the doctor's seeing, the physical therapist, and how does that look all together? And then the last aim was, we did a small remote pilot study, which I'll go into a little bit later, but we wanted to look at exploring doing research visits in the home. Are we able to do it? And then are we getting reliable results from the measures that we're taking in the home? So who are we including in the MOVE FSHD study? So earlier I said that MOVE is really meant for anyone who have FSHD. So really, the only criteria is that you have to be either genetically confirmed with FSHD. It can be type 1, type 2, or both. Or you have a clinical diagnosis with characteristic findings with an affected parent or offspring. So really, it just ensures that you actually have FSHD and not another, neuromuscular, neurological condition. So you either have to have a genetic test or you have to have had a doctor say that you have FSHD, it looks like it's FSHD, and you're related to someone else who also has FSHD. And then really our exclusion criteria is just that you're unwilling or unable to provide consent to do the study, or, some other medical condition in the opinion of your doctor that you should not participate in the study. So the what and the where. The what I'm going to go over in several slides. What are we doing? But so far, it's going to be a prospective observational study of 450 FSHD patients. And the where is there's 12 sites in the United States that are active and enrolling. There's one in the United Kingdom, one is coming in Brazil, and 3 in Canada, and there are more sites coming soon. We plan to follow patients for a minimum of 3 years with visits occurring annually. So basically, we plan to see you once a year, every year for 3 years. And again, our overall hypothesis is that these simple motor measurements are going to predict motor milestones over time. So continuing with the what. So for MOVE, these are the different kinds of study assessments that you will be doing. So you'll come into a MOVE FSHD site once a year. You're going to consent to participate in the study. We're going to collect your demographic information, your medical history, the medications you're taking. We're going to have you fill out some questionnaires. You're going to do a physical exam with one of our study doctors. You're going to do strength, function, and breathing tests with one of our physical therapists and evaluators. And then if you decide to, you can also do a saliva test with the Jones lab to get DNA methylation results. And then we also allow people to give us blood samples, which are really invaluable for us in our research. And then you can see a breakdown of everything that we're doing at each visit on the screen. So we did do a small remote assessment pilot, and I did just want to touch on that because there are some patients that are probably on our webinar today or will be watching. So we did do a small pilot with just 20 patients. 10 were from KU in Kansas City, and 10 participated at the University of Rochester. And basically what we did is we had everyone enroll on site in the MOVE study. And then about 2 to 4 weeks after they did their first on-site visit with us, either at KU or Rochester, we sent them a kit in the mail. And you can see pictures of like what is in the kit on the right side here. Then what we would do is the University of Rochester would conduct a remote assessment visit. So really just using that iPad to do a Zoom visit. They would do everything that we did on site just 2 to 4 weeks earlier, and they would redo it in the person's home. So that did include, a physical exam. We did different strength, function, and breathing tests. We also included this little red wearable device. It's called actigraphy. It's kind of like a Fitbit or a watch that you wear that captures how you move. And then we actually repeated that. So we did one remote assessment visit, and then 2 to 4 weeks later, we actually did a second remote assessment visit. So now what we're doing actually is looking at the data, comparing how the visits went from on-site to remote, and seeing if there were differences there in how reliable the data was and how valid. And then also between the 2 remote visits, was there variability between when we did the visit the first time and then it was easier for someone to do something the second time. So really that was kind of the goal of that pilot study was, can we do remote assessments in the home? And then now we're trying to see, are they reliable to do them in the home? Okay, and something else that we're also doing is the MOVE Plus sub-study, which I'll be going into now. So 200 of our 450 participants, so almost half of our participants, we are hoping are going to do the MOVE Plus sub-study. So really, they're continuing to do the MOVE study, but they are electing to do additional biomarker collection, which means we're just collecting additional things to measure. And that includes the whole body MRI, which you can see some lovely pictures on the the screen. We're also going to be collecting reachable and functional workspace, which you may have heard in other clinical trials before. And then we're also going to be collecting saliva, blood, and muscle samples from participants as well. So going into the Move Plus sub-study a little bit, the aims for the sub-study are a little bit different. So why are we doing the Move Plus sub-study? Why isn't Move just good enough as it is? Well, really, we kind of wanted to look at these other biomarkers and outcome measures that companies and just the field are interested in. So we wanted to try to determine, are we able to get valid whole body MRI results from lots of sites? So that's a really important thing to know is, can we do that? The second one is to determine the most sensitive MRI and I&E criteria to make sure we're selecting for DUX4 related muscle biomarkers. That's a very big mouthful, but basically we want to make sure that we're looking at the correct things on the MRI to determine who is or shouldn't be eligible for our trials if we're looking to knock down DUX4 or if we're looking to change DUX4. So are we looking at the right things in order to target DUX4 in the muscle? And are we selecting the right people for our trials in order to see those changes? The third aim is to determine optimal set of DUX-related biomarkers. So really, what are we looking at in the muscle tissue? Are we looking at the right things? And then how do we think those would change over time? And then the fourth aim is evaluating the relationship between MRI and what we're seeing in the biomarkers, such as the blood biomarkers or the muscle tissue biomarkers. So what's the relationship between the two? So who are we including in Move Plus? There is a little bit of different criteria for Move Plus versus just the regular Move study. Right now, we're only including adults in the Move Plus sub-study. We are planning to allow children to enroll soon as well. But right now, it's just for adults, and we do require that you're able to walk 30 feet, so that's about 10 meters, and that you have a muscle in your leg that is able to be biopsied. Really, the walking criteria is there because if you're still walking about 30 feet or 10 meters, you should have enough muscle in your leg that it would be safe for us to do a biopsy on. And then our exclusion criteria, if you are taking an investigational drug or therapy, so if you're in the Fulcrum study or Avidity or Roche or another clinical trial, we won't include you in Move Plus. You can continue to do Move as long as that's okay with the other trial. But really, we don't need to do MRIs or biopsies on people who are in another study taking an investigational product because they're already doing that in their study. And then the other exclusion criteria is really just if it's not safe for you to do the MRI or biopsy in some way, shape, or form, then we wouldn't include you in this sub-study. Okay, so what are we doing for Move Plus? You can see a breakdown of the schedule of assessments here. So really, we're doing everything that we were already doing for Move. So you're going to see the doctor for a physical exam. We're going to do questionnaires. You're also going to be doing that functional strength and breathing tests with the physical therapists, but we'll also be collecting the saliva sample for the Jones lab. We'll be collecting blood samples. We'll be doing the whole body MRI, the reachable and functional workspace. We are going to do some additional safety labs as well before we do a muscle biopsy. And the muscle biopsy is really a one-time thing for most of our patients, but we do have 20% of our patients coming back. So 40 of the 200 patients would come back to do a 4-month visit where we would repeat the muscle biopsy. And really what we're looking for there for those 40 patients is we're trying to see, is there a significant difference happening in the muscle in that 4-month time frame? So what's changing for people within 4 months and how much are they changing? That was something that we were interested in looking at as well. So how do you get involved? Really, I would be a great point of contact. So you can always reach out to me via email or you can call clinicaltrials.gov. So this is a great place to find all research that might be near you. So pretty much most studies, whether they're drug studies or sometimes our natural history studies, are listed on clinicaltrials.gov. So it will tell you where the studies are participating. It will give you contact information for different sites that could be close to you. And it just kind of lays out the meat and potatoes of each study for you to review. So that's always a great place to go look whenever you're looking for a study and trying to find information. And then another great resource is the FSHD Society. So you can always reach out to them, and then they do a great job of getting in contact with me or our other sites. So now I kind of wanted to go into our results so far. So far we have 265 patients enrolled, actually just a few more than that. So we are about halfway through for our enrollment, which is really exciting. More than 150 people have already come back for their 1-year visits. We also have people coming back for their 2-year visits now. We have 18 pediatric patients enrolled, which is actually one of the largest cohorts, and it's the only study that's really done multiple kids from different sites. So that's very exciting. And then we've had more than 50 of our previous Resolve FSHD study participants roll over into the MOVE study. So we've been able to continue to follow them for about 4 or 5 years rather than just the 2 years initially. We are continuing to enroll new participants into the MOVE study as well as the MOVE Plus study. And then the MOVE Plus sub-study is active and enrolling at all of our US sites. And it's also active and enrolling at one of our Canadian sites, Ottawa. And then our UK site and our 2 additional Canadian sites, we're hoping to get them active and enrolling before the end of the year as well. So just kind of looking at the number of participants and visits that have been completed across our sites. So on the left, you can see the number of participants that have been enrolled at each site. So all sites have enrolled 10 or more patients and are actively seeing them for follow-up. We've had more than 500 visits completed these last 3 years for the study, and you can see how many visits each site has completed. And then here's another way to look at the visits completed per site. You can see the types of visits that were completed. So the blue at the bottom, those are the initial visits enrolling patients into the study. The orange are the follow-up visits that have already occurred with patients currently in the study. You can see the remote assessment visits that were done at our 2 sites. You can also see that there's been some MOVE Plus visits that have been done across different sites. So that's what this is representing here. So taking a look into who is included in our study so far. So we do have a few more males in our population rather than females, which is a little surprising. Normally it's a bit more of a 50-50 split. We have about 58% are males right now in our study, with 42% being female. We are primarily non-Hispanic Caucasian, which has been reported before, but you can see that we do have at least one person enrolled in each category as well. So looking at an age breakdown, so I wanted to see, how many participants do we have in each group. So you can see that we have 6 individuals enrolled from the ages of 5 up to 10 years old. And then we have 1 individual who's actually in their mid-upper 80s. So you can see we have a really nice age breakdown, and that we really do kind of capture the full scale of people with FSHD. You can also notice that we do pull slightly to a little bit older of a generation. So more from people in their 50s up to 70s are participating. But that's not always so surprising either, because sometimes I feel like those people have more time to participate. Okay, FSHD type. So I wanted to see, what's our FSHD type breakdown. Again, it might not be super surprising. 87% of our cohort is FSHD type 1, about 4 to 5% are FSHD type 2, and the remaining 8-9% are those that aren't genetically diagnosed, but they have a family member who has a diagnosis. So 91% of our 265 individuals are genetically confirmed and do have a genetic test saying that they have FSHD. Also, 2/3 of our participants have another family member who has FSHD. Okay, occupation and employment status. I have a public health background, so I find this pretty interesting, as well as coming from maybe like an insurer's or a payer's perspective. Most of our patients participating in studies are actually employed full time. So almost half of our patients are working a full-time job. The other big group that we have is about a quarter of our patients participating in our studies are retired, which might make sense on why we have so many people participating, in their 60s or above. I wanted to look at how FSHD was reported to affect employment. And honestly, I think I was a little surprised. I think I had anticipated that people would have reported that FSHD affected their job more than they actually did. 2/3 of you guys said, no, FSHD doesn't affect my employment at all. And with the quarter remaining, or really last third remaining, either they retired early, they were on disability, or they had job accommodations for their FSHD. Highest level of education completed. Something else that I find really interesting, but I know has been reported before, and this has even changed even since I presented on it earlier this summer. So 75% of people in our study have a college degree or higher. So this is a very educated group of participants, and is probably representative of the disease that everyone is very educated, typically who has FSHD, which I find to be very interesting. First symptom. So really this kind of just shows that across the board, people have varying first symptoms of FSHD, but the most common is proximal arm weakness. So typically probably that shoulder weakness, having trouble raising the arms. The second most common is the other, which makes me want to look into what some of these other first symptoms are and if there's any similarities across these other symptoms that people were having first, followed by facial weakness, which is also pretty typical of FSHD for a first symptom. And then I did want to point out the distal leg weakness. So some people with FSHD have something called foot drop. So that was also quite common as well for people having a first symptom. Clinical severity scores. So these are determined by our doctor, and they just look at different things to see how your FSHD is affecting your function. And again, really, this just shows me that we have a very broad population of FSHD, from people who really aren't affected at all and have no sign of weakness to people who are completely wheelchair dependent. And you can see most people are just smack dab in the middle. They have mild weakness of pelvic or proximal leg muscles. So they have some leg weakness, but they can still stand up from a chair without support, so without using their arms. We also wanted to look at other symptoms that patients might be having and if they felt like it was related to their FSHD. So 27, almost 28% of our cohort do report having difficulty breathing. About half of those people, their doctor felt that it was related to their FSHD. And only 12 to 13% of those people who reported breathing difficulty actually use a breathing machine, whether it's a BiPAP or a CPAP or some other breathing machine. So this does show that, people with FSHD do experience difficulties with breathing, and that it might be a symptom that needs to be addressed and could be correlated with the disease. Do you have eye problems? So we also wanted to look at this as well. So about a quarter of our participants said that they have eye problems. I do want to add, this is other than needing to have contacts or glasses. And then a little less than half of those patients who reported having eye problems, their doctor actually thought it was related to their FSHD. And then we just looked at a breakdown on what people reported their eye problems were. There's retinal hemorrhage, there's a retinal detachment, Coates disease, and then really the biggest report is other. So again, it makes me want to dive into what are these other eye problems that people are reporting? Are there any similarities across people? Should we be adding another, eye disease here that everyone is reporting having as well? Okay, hearing loss. So some people with FSHD do experience hearing loss. So about 18% of our patients said that they did experience hearing loss and that they were diagnosed with hearing loss. And then we also wanted to look at patients who used a scooter or a wheelchair, which accommodates about 20% of our participants. 10% are just using a scooter, and 11, almost 12% are using a wheelchair. And this was either part-time or full-time. So patient-reported leg function. So I just kind of wanted to dive into this a little bit more. So this is actually what patients say they can do. So most patients said that they were still able to walk and run, followed by most patients said that they were able to walk and climb stairs, but they needed to use a railing. So overall, people still have quite a bit of leg function and feel like they were able to do most tasks. You do have people who say they can walk, but they can't run. They can walk and climb stairs, but they have to use a railing. We do have some people who have to walk with a cane or a walker, but they're able to climb stairs. And then the last category is those who just aren't able to walk at all. So again, we're really capturing the a broad population of FSHD, but the two most common are they're able to walk and run, or they're able to walk and climb stairs, but they have to use a railing. So the Vinyos rating scale. So this is basically a look at what the PTs are seeing in terms of lower leg function. So the patients reported their own function, but then we have our physical therapists take a look at patients and say, okay, well, what do I see? And really, for the most part, the physical therapists were seeing the same things. So walking and able to climb stairs without assistance was the most common. And then walking and climbing stairs with the railing was the second most common, which is really what patients reported as well. But again, pretty much everyone, there is still a broad population. Only 8 and 10 were not reported in patients. So other than that, really we're capturing a full scale of function within our FSHD population. Getting out of a chair. Again, so I wanted to look at what patients reported, how they get out of a chair, and then actually the image on the right is comparing how patients reported getting out of a chair versus how the PTs actually saw people getting out of a chair and how fast they were getting out of a chair. And really what this is showing is that it's correlating quite well compared to what patients were reporting and then what the PTs were actually seeing. And the majority of patients were falling within that window. You can see that there are some outliers. Patients were either much slower than they thought they were or have less function than they may have reported. But for the most part, patients reporting their function did correlate to what the PTs were seeing as well. And then on the left, again, it just shows that we have everyone in every category. 5D is not shown here because that means you can't get up out of a chair. So you can't time it. Sitting up from lying. So this is essentially the same thing here. How are patients reporting that they're able to sit up from a lying position? And then how are PTs seeing it in the clinic? And how fast are they able to do it? And again, most patients are reporting their function, and that's correlating to what the PTs are actually seeing and scoring in the clinic. You can see, again, some of these outliers. Patients may be reporting that they're able to do things, and they are, but it takes them longer than maybe what was anticipated. So overall conclusions for the study. So Really, the MOVE FSHD study addresses barriers to clinical trials by helping validate motor, clinical, and patient-reported outcomes, as well as biomarkers. We need to validate the things that we're looking at to make sure we're looking and measuring the correct things and that we're showing a change whenever a drug comes down the pipeline. The project is significant in that FSHD is a common muscular dystrophy. It's considered the second most common type of muscular dystrophy, and the results of this study can have a direct impact on the care you're receiving in clinic, our understanding of the FSHD disease as a whole, and how we're designing these clinical trials. Future considerations that we're looking at. We are continuing to look for, new collaborators, new sites, wanting to get people involved in the project. We're also looking at expanding the pediatric cohort and MOVE. I feel like this has been a really big push in the field lately, as we've done a really great job on coming up with outcomes and biomarkers for adults, but we need to make sure that whatever we're doing in adults, that we also have something that's correlative to kids. So how are we measuring things in children? Is it the same, or does it have to be a little bit different? And we have to validate that as well. Additional biomarker collection. So that's why we did MOVE Plus. People said, well, hey, can't we add MRI, biopsy, and reachable workspace? And we said, sure, if the field needs that, we can go ahead and collect it. Now there's other biomarkers that people are interested in too. So do we need to look at adding a wearable device for the study, or additional blood draws? Is there another tube that we should be collecting and looking at? And also allowing for enrollment of or biomarker collection of asymptomatic individuals with FSHD or healthy controls. So people have also come up to us and said, well, can we collect blood in healthy family members who don't have FSHD, so we understand why someone in a family has FSHD versus someone else? Or those people who have FSHD but really have no symptoms. Why do they have no symptoms compared to somebody else in their family if they're very similar genetically? So those are other things that we're looking at to potentially adding to our study. So I do just want to say a special thank you to our study participants. We cannot do this without them, as well as the study investigators, the clinical evaluators, and the coordinators who are doing the studies at their sites. So we can't do it without our study patients, and we can't do it without our study sites. So a big thank you to them. Just going over other people to thank. So Dr. Jeffrey Statland, he is my doctor and lead investigator here in Kansas City at KU. Dr. Rabi Tawil, he's at the University of Rochester. Those are our two lead investigators on the study and for the Clinical Trial Research Network. Our lead evaluator and PT, Kate Eichinger at the University of Rochester. And then our lead coordinator, Leanne Lewis, who's also at the University of Rochester. Other people to thank. I'm really just going to go through these slides, but I wanted to make sure that I did acknowledge everyone who's working on the study and all of the hard work that they've been doing. And then really, I'm ready for questions.
Great. Well, thank you so very much for that. And we do have a variety of questions. So we'll jump right in. I think for people in the audience, if you have a question for Michaela, please use the Q&A button at the bottom, and that'll help us manage them a little more in an orderly way. But to start us off, I think Jamshid had a few questions.
Yeah, I started just writing a bunch of questions for my colleagues and I, but just out of curiosity, are controls important in a study like this? Like having unaffected people to compare disease progression against, or maybe do you compare it against other muscle diseases?
Like, do you mean enrolling people who have FSHD?
Maybe unaffected siblings, especially for biomarker work where blood, you're looking at a deviation from the norm with like blood biomarkers or those kind of things.
That's definitely something that we like wanted to do for our future consideration. So we're not really doing it now unless they have FSHD and they're asymptomatic, but they have a test, so they're able to do it in our study. But that was a question that's come up, and something that researchers, really academic researchers in general, have been asking is, can we add an arm to the study where we either have healthy people within the family who don't have FSHD, where we can collect these things, or those people who are somewhat asymptomatic, or I sometimes like to think of them as pre-symptomatic, and are we able to collect that data? Right now, unless they really have FSHD, a genetic test or a diagnosis, that would allow them into the trial, but that's something that we're wanting to add is there a way we can, look at those other family members who don't have it or aren't having symptoms? So it's something we thought about. And we've also thought about trying to compare it to other neuromuscular conditions, like limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, or, are there other populations that we could compare against to see what changes are special for FSHD?
Yeah. Before we get, just for the audience, if you have questions, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom. Please feel free to put your questions in there so we can see them. But just following up, I'm sorry, go ahead, June.
Oh yeah, I had a question about eligibility. So you mentioned that people had a family member with FSHD but had not had genetic testing, they would be eligible. I guess if they have symptoms, it's assumed it's because of FSHD. What if somebody doesn't have any affected family members but has symptoms and has not yet been tested? What options do they have to get tested and included in the study?
So I would encourage, because there are those cases where someone really is maybe the only person in their family that has FSHD, or there's other circumstances. I've also had patients who are adopted, so you can't find out if their family members have FSHD. So really what I would do is I would encourage them to get genetic testing when it comes down to that, because that's how we know it's actually FSHD and not another neuromuscular condition. Because most of these conditions, whether it's other muscular dystrophies or FSHD, they're inherited. So typically, if you have FSHD, there's going to be someone else in your family who has it, since it's typically a 50-50 chance every time you have a child for a dominantly inherited disorder. So I would encourage people to get genetic testing if they truly don't have another family member with the disease.
So the study itself does not or can't provide that testing for somebody who wants to.
No, we don't provide like true genetic testing. They can do the spit test through the Jones lab. We're not letting that be an inclusion criteria in our study, simply because we're also doing the Jones lab test. So you can't really say someone can be included based on their Jones lab test when we're also giving the Jones lab their test to help validate.
Yeah.
But I would just encourage patients to get the genetic testing, whether it's commercially, they can do it through the FSHD registry, which does take a while, but it is free. And that also, is typically taken for studies, but I would encourage them to do that.
Okay, great. Jamshid, do you have?
So we have some questions coming in. One of them I just felt free to answer because I think I knew the answer correctly, was somebody wanted to participate, but they don't want to provide a muscle biopsy. And I just clarified that only Move Plus has muscle biopsy requirements. The bigger study of Move does not. And so they should contact you, or I guess maybe Leanne, to learn about what sites are closest to them to participate.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the overarching Move study, which is just really seeing the doctor, doing stuff with the PTs, questionnaires, and then you get to decide if you want to do the spit test or the blood draw. Move Plus is in addition to, we're also going to collect an MRI, reachable workspace, and a biopsy. And the biopsy, again, it's pretty much a one-time biopsy. We are asking basically 40 people to do an additional biopsy, but that's optional, the second one.
Great.
So biopsies are not required. They are optional.
Great. And so along the same lines, is a Move trial or location in Chicago? I guess somebody is interested in joining.
It's not a site specific to Chicago yet. Much to June's dismay, probably. The closest site to you will probably be our site in Columbus, Ohio, or me here in Kansas City at KU. We typically take the Chicago area patients, unless there's another site that you feel like is a really easy direct flight or something like that to get to.
Are there travel reimbursements for people who participate in these studies?
There are not at this point in time. So when we started MOVE originally 3 years ago, we were mainly doing it when people were coming in for their clinic visits. So they were already coming to see us anyways. So there's no travel reimbursement at the moment for the study. That's something we've looked into, maybe particularly more for MOVE Plus than just regular MOVE, because regular MOVE, again, most people are just coming whenever they see their study doctor. But for MOVE Plus, since you're doing the MRI, the biopsy, it's typically a 2-day visit. That's something that we're looking into, is trying to find funds to help pay for a hotel or, gas money, things like that. But as of this point in time now, we don't have travel reimbursement.
Thank you.
There's a question here, hopefully an easy one to answer. Does the 30-foot walk need to be unaided, or can it be done using a cane or walker?
Yes, that's a great question. And I didn't get too much in the weeds for that, but you can use a cane or a walking stick or orthotics. You cannot use a walker. So really just the cane, walking sticks, or if you have like the ankle braces or leg braces, those are okay. But if you're using a walker or a scooter or a wheelchair, you would not be able to qualify. Mainly probably because you don't have enough leg muscle for us to safely take a biopsy if you're needing a walker, scooter, or a wheelchair.
Great. Along the lines of what's being tested, there's another question on pain. Are there any patient-reported outcomes or studies looking at pain?
So we have a pain and exercise questionnaire that you guys fill out every time you come to see us. For the pain part, it's just, do you have pain? Yes or no. Where do you have pain? What do you do for your pain? Do you feel like you get relief from your pain? And then how, on average, what is your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? So those are the kinds of questions that we're asking every time you come to see us.
Related to this, I was wondering, you mentioned that one of the goals of MOVE is to help with the standardization of care. So 2 questions along that line is, with Resolve kind of was very similar as the way MOVE is being set up. Did you see an improvement, or is there a way of gauging that the CTRNs, the standards of care, are being more uniform across all the sites and everybody's getting the same? And related to this, are people who are participating in MOVE, let's say they reach a certain milestones where maybe foot drop becomes more pronounced and now there's more falls, do they immediately get redirected, maybe seeing a physical therapist so they can get the orthotics necessary to help prevent the falls? Like, does the MOVE Plus provide some care as well as being part of the study?
So studies and clinical care are a little bit different. So I always try to let patients know research just in general is something on top of whatever you're normally doing for your FSHD. So whether you're going to go see your study doctor, whether or not you're going to go see your clinic doctor once or twice a year, you'll keep doing that. And then you do these visits on top of. However, anything that is like medically important to you, we will let you know. So, I mean, if your breathing tests were super, super different and low from last time, we would be like, hey, we noticed that there was a change. You should probably, if we're not already, the place that you're seeing us as your regular doctor, we're going to say, hey, you should go let your regular doctor know that we saw a drop in your breathing tests, or, hey, you really struggled with stairs this time, or, things like that. So anything that's like medically relevant to participants, we are going to let you know so that you can address it with your doctor, whether your doctor is us, one of us as the CTRN sites, or whether you see a doctor somewhere else for your FSHD. So we'll always tell you things that are important to you medically. We try not to tell you how much you've changed since the last visit, because sometimes people do things differently or answer questions differently, and we don't want to bias you on how we feel you've changed since last year. We want to know how you think you changed since last year.
Great, thank you. I think it's important to kind of distinguish clinical research from clinical care, and that's kind of the reason for that question. But thank you, great answer.
I have a question here asking whether 3 years might be too short to evaluate progression for
Sylvie,
FSHD.
I love the way you think. I feel like FSHD patients might be like, well, that's way too long. I don't want to have to wait that long. That's a big question. And that's why we're also doing this study. Our previous study was a 2-year study, so 24 months. And the thought of having patients roll over from our previous study and being able to do MOVE is that then we would have 4 or 5 years of data on them. So the answer is, and it's not a good one, maybe. So 3 years may be too short to see a huge change, but we were hoping by 3 years, someone might do the stairs differently, or someone will have needed to have an ankle brace, or someone may have needed to get a breathing machine during the study. So we're hoping that it's almost long enough that we're going to see some sort of hard health outcome change. Something changed in 3 years. Was there anything predictive that could have shown us that change? So the answer is we don't know, which is why we're doing the study and why these studies are still needed, because we don't know what the typical progression of a patient with FSHD looks like. And it looks really different compared to all of you guys, right? Compared to kids, compared to type 2. Everyone's really different. So we were trying to have a really broad study to capture you all as a whole.
So yeah, you've answered, I think, another question, which is really, is there anything in the data that is predictive of whether someone is going to rapidly or slowly lose strength? So you are still looking, right?
Yes, we are
short
still
answer?
looking. I was hoping I would have been slightly further in my data analysis. I'm about 2 weeks out from having more answers to those questions. We're doing an interim data analysis now, which means we're just looking at our data in the study. And that is one of our biggest questions. So to be determined, and hopefully we will have something out to you soon, because we're wanting to know what is predictive for someone, getting slower or needing a BiPAP or needing a wheelchair, because that's obviously important to you guys and for us as clinicians in the clinic to know to look for those signs.
This is, I think, a related type of question about whether there is any gestalt of what kind of functional measure might be good as a longitudinal outcome measure. Interesting point this person makes is maybe that type of measure might depend on the severity of the disease. So one type of thing might apply for someone in an early stage that might not be as predictive for someone in a different stage of the disease.
Yeah. And I might take like a step back and then kind of step forward answering that question. So maybe kind of going back to what you said earlier, Jamshid. So we had a study called Resolve, and it's almost done at this point. The Resolve study was a study to look at a ton of different outcome measures that we could do for FSHD, and we were trying to figure out what's sensitive and what's reliable. MOVE, we kind of tried to say, okay, what can we actually do in clinic realistically? And then looking at those outcome measures. And also why we decided to do MOVE is because I think that you are correct. Certain functional measures are going to be important for different types of patients, to tell what's predictive for them. If you're already in a wheelchair, leg function might not be predictive because you are already in a chair, but your arm function and how that changes and how that's perceived might predict on if you're needing another device, those sorts of things. So I do think different measures mean different things for different people, depending on where they're at in their disease, which is why we want such a broad population and we want to look at it over a long period of time. Because it will change throughout time, depending on how the person's disease is progressing. Lifting a cup to your mouth, that would be very different for someone that's walking versus someone that's in a chair, how important it is and maybe how they do it.
Along the same lines, and this is, I think you mentioned that one of the big tasks is to validate a lot of these endpoints. So correlating patient-reported outcomes with what's actually seen by physical therapists during an actual physical test. I think a lot of the tests, my understanding is that they are timed tests. But people actually, as disease progresses, they do a lot of compensatory movements to be able to achieve the same goal. So time may be affected, but the way people compensate and adjust to complete a task may change over time. Are there any attempts at trying to capture how people adapt that? Because that could also be telling, if you're just looking at can complete a certain task or not, you may miss some important adjustments people are making.
Definitely think we're trying to capture that in a few different ways. So in one way, we have the physician, the actual doctor, study doctor looking at you. They report what they think your strength to be, and typically like your arm function, maybe a couple of, can you walk on your heels? Can you walk on your toes? They're looking at that in one way. And then we have our PTs who are also looking at your strength in their own PT hat. They are doing time function tests, but some of those, the tests, and it depends on which test you're doing. Some of it is, can you do it? Can you not? Some of it is, can you do it? How fast do you do it? But also they're typically scoring on compensatory measures. So it's a little bit of both. We're looking at your time and how fast you do it, but a score from a 2 or a 3 could be how you do it in addition to how long does it take you to do it.
Right.
Then we're also looking at things that really aren't timed at all, but like the Brook and Vigneault scales are basically, what does the PT think your arm function is? What do they think your lower leg function is? And then there's the breathing tests too. Breathing tests are a little bit more straightforward. You just do them and the machine tells you if there's compensation or not.
Great. Thank you.
There's a question here asking if you know who are family members who are both, within MOVE. Like you probably have a number of, families where multiple members are participating in MOVE. If you do, are you able to, do you know that so that you can kind of look at differences among family members who would, have the same genetic?
Yeah, great questions, Grace. Love that you're here. Hi. And I'll go ahead and I'll answer your third question too as well. Yes, as long as patients have consented and told us and said it's okay to tell us, we are linking family members even across sites. So as long as patients tell us and are okay with us, especially in particular to the Jones lab, we tell the Jones lab, hey, this is mom of so-and-so, or this is aunt of so-and-so, and even across sites, because sometimes, we have a family member that in California that's also related to someone who's participating in Colorado or whatever. So we are trying to link family members, but it's, only as good as if our patients tell us they have a family member. But we've done a pretty good job about that because we're also trying to see, does their genetics look the same? Methylation, why are they different potentially? Those are definitely things we're looking at. Then Grace has another really good question, which I probably didn't do the best job explaining. Why are we taking the biopsy? I realize I've done a lot of biopsies and research in my career. I realize no one wants to do a biopsy. No one wants to have a chunk of muscle taken out of them. It doesn't sound like fun. I will say it's not as bad as it sounds. We try to make it as good as it can be, and you literally walk out of my clinic, and go home. So it's a little bit different than probably what people experienced in the past. In order to know what is going on in your muscle, we need to look at it. This is important also for drugs. If you have a drug that's targeting something in your muscle, how do you know it's getting there and doing what it's supposed to do if we don't look at it? The other thing that we're looking at in particular in my natural history studies is everyone's really excited about MRI, right? And in particular, something that we're excited about is STIR positivity. We think that STIR positivity means that it's showing active FSHD happening in the muscle. So for MOVE Plus, this is basically the whole reason for MOVE Plus, we do the MRI, we see something really cool on the MRI. let's take a little piece of it. Is what we're seeing in the MRI actually happening in that piece of muscle? So we're trying to see, is MRI a good biomarker? What are we actually seeing in the muscle? And is it possible to see a change? Because we don't want to take chunks of muscle out of you if we don't think we're going to be able to see a change with a drug, right? It means we need to find a different measure. So that's really why it's important, is how are we supposed to figure out what's going on in your muscle if we don't look at it? The other part I do want to point out, because I know it is very scary, the amount of muscle that we take it cannot affect your function, really. It is less than the size of a pencil eraser. It is very, very tiny amount of muscle that we take. It's just enough to see what's going on. It's not enough to, hurt your leg function, stop you from walking, things like that. That's not the purpose. It's just to take a look at what's going on.
I think Grace may have this somewhat unusual orientation on this. I think she's asking, why don't you require that of everybody? Like she wants this to be the most thorough scientific study possible.
We don't require it of everybody because it's not safe for everybody to do. So really, Move Plus is almost as broad as it can be. You can't do muscle biopsies in people taking certain kinds of drugs. You can't really take a muscle biopsy in someone that has no leg muscle. We would be getting is just fat and fibrotic tissue, and that would be putting someone through something when we're not even going to get a piece of muscle. So really, it's more about safety than it is us not wanting to include people. So that's really the reason why. And we are trying to include a lot of people because we're trying to get basically half of the people in our study to do it. So we want to get most people to do it if they're able and willing.
So there's a question, and I also had some questions about the demographics, like the education level, employment, and so on. I think all of us share concern that this may not reflect who is actually out in the world with FSHD, because if you have fewer educational opportunities or are socioeconomically disadvantaged and you're not on the net getting our newsletters and Googling, that you may never get diagnosed, number one. You might never hear about these research opportunities, and you may not be in a situation where you can participate, take time off from work, or another possibility, because our health economics study shows significant numbers of people who are on disability. So they're, on Medicare before age 65, so they're on disability. So if they're on disability, they may also, if they're not able to work, they may also not be able to travel to the site to participate. I'm not sure what to to say about that, but it is a factor, right, to consider.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I definitely think, by no means do I think our study truly represents the entire population of FSHD. That's just not possible. I think what I was trying to say is we are hoping that because our study is so broad and we're trying to include as many people as possible, that it will be the most representative study to date. I don't think truly maybe the 3/4 of all people with FSHD have a college degree or higher. That's just the people that are in our study. I do think that people with FSHD, and I'm going to have to do my own due diligence about comparing it to other diseases and other trials. I do think people with FSHD tend to be more educated than maybe other people with neuromuscular diseases. And I find that interesting because I think in general, you are a slightly more educated group of individuals than maybe your other counterparts with muscular dystrophy or other neurological conditions. So I do find that to be interesting. You guys may still just be more educated on a whole than other people. And I do think, we're out of time. Sorry.
We're out of time, but I had 3 questions that had to do with more pragmatic, site related issues. So one was, does Stanford, they only reached out to the person for the Move Plus study? Are they also doing Move? So
all sites are doing everything, but all of these sites have also been doing trials for 3 years. So Stanford, for instance, every site in the US was originally going to enroll 20 patients. And then now we've extended the enrollment to, 28 to 30 patients per site. So Stanford in particular, they filled their first 20 patients for Move. So now they're trying to get, 8 additional patients in for Move Plus. So they may still have additional Move slots available, but I know that they're trying to get their Move Plus study filled first. And really, they only have so many slots per site, and some sites have already enrolled 26, 25 people. So they only have, 3 Move Plus slots left rather than 3 Move slots left. So it's really dependent per site on how many they currently have in the study, how many they have left to recruit for Move Plus. So really Stanford at this time, they did meet their recruitment goal of 20 Move patients. So they're really looking for just Move Plus right now. But the sites, they can have flexibility on enrolling in just Move.
Okay. And if you are in a study currently and you move, can you transfer to a different CTRN location and continue this?
You can, and it also kind of depends. Like, we might ask you if it's like your third visit, so it's year 2 or something. If you're willing to go back to your original site and do that visit, that's great. If not, then we'll transfer you to a site that's closer. We just try to do as many visits as possible at the same site, the same location, so it's as similar as possible. So if you've been doing the study, you've already done your first visit, you've already done your 1-year visit, you're coming up on year 2. If you're willing and able to go back to your original site for the 24-month visit, that would be great. Otherwise, we will transfer you over. We just make a note of that because you're going to be working with different people. So, the PTs in Texas could see something different than the PTs in Utah. So it's just something we want to take into account on why someone might change drastically or look really different between visits.
And just one final comment / question or something about when looking at that demographic data, there's a big hump, on the 60 and above, or, older patients, which suggests to me that you could definitely use more people who are younger. And I know there's a big push right now to get more pediatric, but also I'm looking at, teens, people in their 20s and 30s. These are really critical times when people are maybe changing and, but maybe they're not enrolling in studies because they're still functioning better and might not feel an urgency to participate. But I guess, what do you observe about that, and what do you wish to see in terms of, the age of people who are enrolling, I guess?
I would like to see a better distribution. Our studies the last couple of years, including the Resolve study, we've tend to enroll a lot of people who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, which is awesome, but they're probably not the most representative of the entire group, right? Because there are kids with FSHD, there's young adults. So I don't think we're truly capturing the entire population. So it's about trying to figure out how people, my age and younger, how to get them involved. I realize there might be a little bit more of a barrier because they're having kids early in their careers, so they might not have the amount of time off as someone who's older and more established in their career, might not be retired. But I think it's really important for us young people to represent. So I think that there's a lot to learn from us. I think there's probably a lot of progression that happens within the first 30, 35 years, and I think it's not being captured well because we don't have anyone in that age to look at. So really, I think what we understand is FSHD that happens in an older population.
So I think in our audience, there may be people with family members, children, nieces, nephews, younger siblings who might, that you can be ambassadors to if they're not participating, if they're not involved. You're hearing it from you or having you advocate for them, would be probably more potent than our sending out some emails. But
yeah, definitely.
So With that, well, thank you so much for your time today. That was a great presentation. So every time we talk about MOVE, I can't wait to see what new things you're finding. It's absolutely fascinating. And so for everybody out there in the audience, a round of applause for Michaela. And next month in November, we will have our FSHD University webinar on Project Mercury, which is something some of you may have heard about. It's a huge new global initiative from led by, at the moment, by the FSHD Society and an international coalition. And Ken Katava will be telling you all about it, and come with your questions so that Ken can answer them. All right, thank you so much. We'll see you next month.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.